Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Ask Nancy, my monthly live stream that I do here on StreamYard. We have a lot of fun in these sessions talking about all things related to leadership and communication and coaching, and I get some great guests. Today is no exception. I have my friend Dan Osborne with me, and Dan is an executive coach, very experienced, been around the block, knows a lot of stuff, an assessment guru, I think it's safe to say. And he works under the platform MaxPotentialCoaching, which he will tell you a little bit more about that. But we're going to talk today about, is everyone coachable, which is a provocative topic. But before we do that, Dan, why don't you introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit about what sparks you about being a coach?
Absolutely. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be a guest here. And I've had a chance to kind of admire some of your work over the past couple of months. So it's a pleasure to be here. What makes me tick as a coach? Well, I tend to be a straight shooter. I really describe my coaching style as direct but empathetic. Because when someone's going through coaching, one of the few things they really reflect on is how difficult it is to actually go through the changes of coaching, of what it can do for you. So what I really like most about it is just getting down to business, but making sure they know that I care deeply for them while we move through this. That's one of the biggest things is they need somebody to walk with them through these changes. It
Yeah,
takes a while.
it's so true. And it's so funny because when I was thinking this morning about our talk, I was like, I think I'm going to introduce him as a no nonsense coach because you are a no nonsense coach. But I'm so glad you mentioned that empathetic piece because I think that's really key. And I think it really helps the effectiveness of a coaching engagement.
Absolutely. If you don't have any empathy for what they're going through, it's just such a missing piece. And
Right.
I have a background as an industrial organizational psychologist. I've been in the consulting game for a little while. So you develop, this hard nosed approach to business to getting things done, and that can help you in coaching. But it's much more people skills. It's much more, how do I help them grow as a person? Because that's what coaching is. It's a developmental process and they have to be involved in their participation of their development. And
For
sometimes they
sure.
just need to hear that they're not just talking to a brick wall that wants to make money. It's somebody who actually wants to help them. Because if they pick up on that you're not there to actually help them, that you don't really care about their change, good luck keeping them around.
Right. If it starts to feel like a box check or it's just another session in a multitude of sessions for your coach, or they're not really. And so I don't know what you think about this, but I think that requires a lot of active listening instead of a lot of talking and, um, advising. It's very different. And you and I have had this conversation, the difference between coaching and advising and mentoring and all those things. So it is a different engagement, right?
Yeah, we joke about it, but like being a coach is one of the very few professions in the world where you can say, I'm not going to give you the direct answer because I'd be depriving you of development. Good
Yeah.
luck saying as a consultant that you're not going to give somebody the answer.
Right. Let's just get, I'd like you to guess, or that
I know
doesn't really
you're
work.
paying me thousands of dollars, but I
Right.
want you to figure it out,
I
you
know.
know.
I know. So the topic today, and I want to get right into it because I think it's going to be really a provocative discussion for a lot of people is everyone coachable? Now, there's a short answer, right? And there's a longer answer. What do you think the short answer is?
Well, the short answer is no.
Yes, exactly. Correct. The short answer is no.
100%. We can move on to the explain your reasoning portion
Explain.
now.
Yeah. So let's talk about the longer answer. What are your thoughts about that? And what gets someone from being, wait, let's stop. What does it mean to not be coachable? What are the deficits? What is lacking when someone is not coachable?
Well, the first thing I think is that everyone is not coachable because everyone is not interested in developing themselves. And that's like blasphemy in our field. Like, what do you mean you don't want to develop yourself? This is illegal to say. So it's very hard for coaches and sometimes consultants and high level people in organizations to think that way. But there are people who simply don't want to hear feedback, or in Marshall Goldsmith's case, feed forward. Some people, don't, they think coaching is being told what to do, which I haven't met too many people that like to be told what to do. There are people who are simply not interested in developing themselves professionally, but personally either. So they like where they're at, or they're just not interested in moving forward. And I don't want to shame anybody for that. Some people are happy with where they are in life, but at the same time, there are also people who don't know how to be coachable. They just were never taught this. It is a
Right.
skill to know how to be coachable, because like going back
Right.
to what you said, active listening.
Active
We've
listening.
all met people who don't listen. So good luck with that. It's
Right.
something they haven't been taught before. So it's not necessarily that they may not be coachable. It's just they're not coachable at the present time because they don't know how to be.
Right. So let's pause on that. You made so many good points. First of all, I failed to mention that you and I share, we are both Marshall Goldsmith certified executive coaches. So that's a very strong, successful methodology, operating system, if you will, that has worked wonders in these coaching engagements. Now, so that's why we bring up the feed forward concept, which is a really powerful one. But your point about some people, and this is in no way meant to be judgmental or critical, some people just aren't self-aware enough to know how to engage in a coaching situation. They may think, and Marshall talks about this in his books, that, well, the way I am got me this far, so it's good enough. It must be fine, or I wouldn't have been promoted to the C-suite, or I wouldn't have. And that's just such a fallacy, right? Because what
Yes.
got you there won't necessarily get you to the next level.
And you see it so much as coaches. It's probably one of the most common things we see. Somebody does really good hard work and they get themselves promoted. Maybe they go to a new company, get a new position, and they're just like, okay, I'm here now and I don't know what to do. And
Right.
it's so common, and that feeds into the imposter syndrome side of
Right.
things. And we could talk for hours about that, but I'll try to bring
Yes.
it on back here. But they said, well, I worked really hard. I always got these tasks done. I always executed things. And it's such a classic example of an executioner to an actual achiever.
Yes.
Someone who's very operational and tactical, learning how to be strategic and more big brain philosophical. And okay, you want to do things, you want to get things done, but where do those tasks come from? That's
Yeah.
one thing I love to ask people, because they're like, I just want to go do my work. Do you know what your work is and where it comes from? And a lot of the time that's very difficult for them. There's always that pause, but it's that very active pause where you see the wheels turning. You're like, well, it comes from somebody above me. What do you think their job is?
Right. That sort of holistic approach. And where is the purpose attached to this? And what's the bigger picture? And where do you fit in that? And not to sidetrack us here, but the question of vulnerability. And if there's vulnerability, right? In our training, we've learned and we embody this concept of there has to be courage, humility, and discipline.
Oh
Courage,
yeah.
humility, and discipline. And if those do not exist or we can't find them, chances are that this coaching client is not going to be able to change the perceptions that are held about them, period.
That's right. And it starts with that first piece. Do they have the courage to do this? Do they have the discipline to stick to the action plan? And do they have the humility to, like you said, be vulnerable, but also understand, hey, I don't know it all. And
Right.
oftentimes the best leaders I ever come across are these people who say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, and that's okay. Let's get on the path to where I can figure out what I'm doing.
Right. Or at
And
least sometimes I don't know what
yeah,
I'm doing. It's like I could use input. Kathy Barron just wrote in, and understanding where the tasks are leading you. Like
yes,
you don't just execute on something and then it's in the, in the class. Like, what's the purpose of it? Think about your internal customer. There's so many, facets to it.
there is. And that brings up a great piece, because once you can understand, like, where are these insertions, where are these origins coming from? Why am I being asked to do this work? And what's the greater good that comes from it? When you start to be able to see the whole board, the whole chess piece, and not just the pawns, you start to see where everything moves, why it moves that way, and what the actual strategy is. Once you can actually understand that, understand your piece of it, you begin to have a much different experience. Say, okay, well, if I can be more open to changing this and this and this, maybe I can actually get access to more things. Maybe I can learn more than I want to. And that was the second part I wanted to bring up. I know that we can go round and around here as much as we want to, but it's, if everyone's not coachable, who cares? What's the point of being coachable? What do they get out of it? And that's like something I bolded that I really wanted to talk about is,
Oh, let's hear it. I want to hear your
yeah,
thoughts
just
on that.
whenever, especially if I have a new coachee who is interested in coaching, but they're just like, they want me to kind of prove myself to them. I just say, I don't need to prove anything to you. You're the one who wants something out of your life and out of your work. So I say, what are you going to get out of this? And they say, well, I don't know. I said, are you interested in being promoted? Do you want to make more money? Do you want to have access to different types of work? Do you have a passion or a type of work you want to do in the workplace that you don't have access to right now?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most interesting things I found out over the years with coaching is the more coachable somebody becomes, more naturally they become more collaborative. And that's kind of like that key to getting more of what you wanted. If more people want to work with you, that's just having access to more opportunities. So if you could be collaborative because you're open to being coachable, listening to what people have to say, answering questions, and you want to ask questions as well, that's just going to open up more opportunities to you.
Yeah, it sounds like there's an undercurrent of curiosity in there. If I'm not mistaken, that the curious brain, the growth mindset brain, right? Being open to kind of like, how am I, how do I fit in this jigsaw puzzle? How am I perceived by my stakeholders? How am I operating in the universe here? How am I showing up? You have to be curious, not just humble and disciplined. You have to be curious enough to want to know those things, and then to take that information and not judge yourself, not judge other people. Just how we always say, whenever you get feedback, thank the person for it. Thank them.
Yeah.
But that takes, right, a little bit of, you have to be open to that, and that takes curiosity.
Or how many times have you given somebody, feedback or feed forward and they instantly feel defensive and have to tell you why they did what they did? That's
Right.
a real big growth point. If you don't feel the point to do that as much, it's a good way to measure like, okay, I'm not being as defensive, or I'm not as, I don't need to justify myself as much. I just take this feedback or feed forward for what it's worth and use
Yeah.
it.
It's
And
information.
yeah, absolutely. And if you like it, use it. Or if you don't like it, just move on. I can't even tell you how many times Marshall said, take that grain of salt wherever you want to. And
Exactly.
yeah, and I
Exactly.
mean, he's such a good pioneer of this, and it's
Oh
hard
my
not to
gosh.
refer back
Yeah.
to him. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I always like to reframe it this way though, and I love what you said. You said, where's your self-awareness? Have you thought about this for yourself? What is your
Right.
self-awareness of yourself, your stakeholders? How are others perceiving you? And then where's your place in the universe? Because it's a big place, but it also helps you to zone back in. Like, I'm just this tiny little piece. There's a lot I can do and a way I can develop, but there's so much more to this than just me. So it helps come
Yeah.
back to that humility piece as well.
Right. And understanding the ecosystem you're operating in, right? How do I fit into this? And, as coaches, there's this ecosystem with our coachee, right?
Yeah.
And we are there to help them rise to their potential, whatever that is. They have to identify that with us. We have to, understand that together. But like you say, it's not just saying, oh, do this, change this. um, you know it's understanding where you fit, how you show up, and then, like, being open to seeing yourself in a different way, because we're sitting in our brains all the time. So we just know what we know, right? We don't really, I mean, unless you really spend a lot of time listening, and, right, the 360s, right? We do these 360s,
All the
and
time.
then we debrief. So for those of you that may not know what that means, in a coaching engagement that, like, we're talking about right now, you canvas the people that work closely with the coaching client to understand how they are perceived. And then as a coach, we debrief the coaching client on what we've learned. And that can be a very interesting session, right?
Oh yeah, there's so much that can happen there. Sometimes you might have to play the role of protector because they might hear something that absolutely just annihilates their world or their own perception of themselves as a leader. So that can happen. Sometimes they can say, I thought something was going on, and you've helped me identify that. Sometimes
Yes.
you get that approach, and sometimes you just say, some folks are in denial, but you're like, well, we have 13 people who took this assessment on your behalf, and 13 out of 13 have said something along the lines of this.
Yeah.
So they're confronted with this truth or just this piece of feedback or feed forward, whatever it may be. And they may not be receptive to it there at the time. But usually on that second time around, if you bring it up again, they've had a chance to kind of cope with this, because sometimes people just feel attacked no matter what. And you might think they shouldn't feel that way. Well, we can't tell people how to feel. Right. Yeah, you just can't do that. They have to do this their own way. And that really speaks to the crux of coaching. You should never be telling your coachees what to do. It has to be their choice. They have to be the number one participant in their own development.
Yeah. We ask a lot of questions. I won't speak for you, but in my coaching engagements, I ask a lot of questions and do a lot of not talking. Like I do a lot of listening. And especially when in that debriefing session on the 360, I've had clients who are just, deer in the headlights, like, what now? Like I had no idea. And even if they're not defensive, they feel hurt, like they feel badly. And then it's not, oh, don't feel badly, or, well, that tells you have to. It's just like, where do you want to go from there? Where would you like to proceed from here? What do you, and get them to kind of, and it improves their skills on so many levels, emotional intelligence, all the things, listening skills, noticing skills, self-awareness. Can I ask a question to kind of, I want to go to a different lane.
Yes, please.
Could you share a sort of like a case study or a situation you had as a coach where on the discovery call or in the first meet and greet, you were kind of like, I don't know how this is going to go, but then it ended up being a successful engagement?
Yeah, one person came to mind right away, and I don't want to name the company or anything, but I was working with this individual. He was we'll just call him, his supervisor reached out to me saying, hey, could you work with this person for XYZ? I say, well, sure, I can have a discovery call with them to see what's going on. And this person mentioned XYZ as they thought was the problem. And they said, well, so-and-so is happy to meet with you. They know that I'm reaching out to you about this. So we get on the discovery call. Everything's going well. And this individual was so emotional and irate and so worried about so many different things.
Yeah.
And when I'm just listening, I think that call was 90% of me not talking and just listening and just hearing him vent his frustrations and a lot of his fears. And I know you do a lot of work with fear. Just sitting there listening, I was like, oh boy, I'm very nervous to tell this guy that he's not coachable right now, because he whenever I did talk, the very few things I said, he wouldn't answer the question directly. He kept coming back to his emotions, kept coming back to his fear, and how
he was pretty raw. He was
extremely raw. And I was almost like, do I need to forward him to a clinician? Like, is this getting this bad? Because we're right on that line there, where it's almost inappropriate to be with them at that point.
Yep.
And towards the end of it, he just kind of like sat back in his chair and he was like, Dan, I'm so sorry. I feel horrible about this. I was like, well, what's the problem? And he said, this has just been bothering me for so long. And it came out to him just needing to really intensely vent. And he just needed a sounding board. I didn't make much sound, but that's just what he needed at the present time. And in the last 15 minutes of this call, it's about an hour, he put in more work in that 15 minutes than probably the next 2 sessions we had, because the next session he was still pretty upset about some things, but he didn't spend the whole time, venting. It was really, he was so irate. He had felt he had been mistreated so many ways. He wasn't getting what he deserved. He was going unappreciated, all the all-time greats that really upset people in the workplace. And I was holding on because I was like, there's something else here. And because it's so rare for that to actually happen. People vent, but it's usually not 45 minutes.
Right.
So just listening, I was like, okay, I'm almost deeming him uncoachable. But at the very end, he kind of pulled it back. And I even told him that directly. I was like, Chris, I should have said his name, whatever.
No last names.
Yeah, no last names. So I said, Chris, you're on the border of not being coachable, and this is why. I understand that you feel like XYZ. I empathize. I'm not qualified to deal with that side of things. If you want to talk to a mental health professional, I will arrange it for you. But this is where we have to stay if you want to be in a coaching engagement.
Okay.
And he was so receptive to that.
See, that's good. I want to
Yeah.
pause on that, Dan, because it's such an important point to make. And before I comment on that, Dan just wrote in, sort of encapsulated what we were saying, that coaching engagements are only really effective if the coachee is in control of their ego and has some EQ.
It's a huge.
So, they have to be prepared to hear things they might not like to hear. And that's such a keen observation. And that is true.
They need a lot of inner strength and fortitude for that.
Fortitude, right. It takes, but on this point, I really want to pause because I think it's critically important as coaches. Sometimes we get referred to, or we have a discovery call with someone who is just bleeding, right?
Yes.
They're raw, they're enraged, maybe deeply hurt by something, like really having a struggle in interacting with others, or whatever the case may be, whatever brought them to that discovery call with you, if it was their supervisor or their HR person or themselves. And oftentimes, I've done it, I know you've done it, the best thing to do is to say, even if you don't say, you're not coachable right now, to say, before we can do effective work together, I strongly encourage you to seek out the guidance of a mental health care professional. Even if you have, some sessions just to work some things out, or to get some clarity on what it is that you want to work on with me within my realm, right? Within the realm of coaching. I have referred many people to resources to find a mental health care professional that could help them, support them. Nice. And then it could very well be that we can work alongside, it can happen concurrently, that they have therapy appointments and then we do some coaching. And oftentimes coaching and therapy works very nicely together,
Oh,
so
yeah.
Everyone is unique and it's a case by case basis, but I'm glad you raised that, Dan, because I think it's really important. We are not therapists. And if someone comes to us and they're really struggling or having a lot of triggers, or, they have some childhood trauma that they haven't maybe healed, it's really, it is, the onus is on us to be honest and say, look, do some of that work. And then I'd love to come back to this.
Absolutely. No, you summarized that very well. And you said an individual named Dan in the chat. He brought an excellent point. That was beautifully said. So yeah, that's definitely the case. That's definitely how it works. And I personally, like to try to make sure they understand where those boundaries are, because it just opens up a can of worms that nobody needs when you cross over those boundaries, and it helps nobody, and it's
unethical.
Everyone.
It's unethical. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And, this individual, when I was working with him, what we did work together, he ended up making some very good changes, and I'm really proud of him. But before he had a session with me, kind of backtracking on a point you sort of touched on, as a coach, if you do come across this and you think this individual is coachable, but they still are having this issue, yes, like you said, counseling can be an effective tool to work in tandem with you, for one. But two, I would not allow him to book a session with me until he gave me an outline of what he wanted to cover in the next coaching session. I said, this is your requirement. This is your homework. Think of it as your mini action plan for going into the session. And then we work on your overall action plan. So if he did not send me this, at least 3 days before our session, I would cancel him. And I had to do it twice. But after that, he got with the program. So he just needed some strong boundaries, and he ended up doing it incredibly well.
So it sounds like he needed, no nonsense, Coach Dan. It sounds like he needed structure.
He did. He needed that. He needed somebody to listen in an unbiased way, to be a real sounding board, and to say, I'm not here to say that you're right or wrong about this.
Right.
I'm most likely going to believe you because you wouldn't be behaving this way if there wasn't some truth to it. But that's not what we're here to talk about. That's not what we're here to do. And I would just ask, can you objectively set this aside for the next hour so I can work with you to get you in the direction you want to go?
Right. We want to keep people from litigating their experience. Your experience is your experience. Let's take your experience and unpack it to help you understand your response or reaction to it and how you want to move forward. But we're not going to litigate like everything, whether it really happened or you interpreted it the right way. That's not helpful.
It's not, and they'll try to negotiate things. They'll try to do this and that, and it's a good thing because they're so involved in their development, like I mentioned earlier. But at the same time, they just kind of like, well, it'd be better if we could work around this. I was like, well, that's the point. The workaround is the problem. We're not going to do a workaround. We're going to go right directly at this wall and knock it down for you.
Yeah,
now, you're going to knock it down, but I'm going to coach you on the side. Nobody's going to be cheering harder for you than me. But this is how we get it done.
Yeah, it's really cool what we do, right? It's really cool. There's so much opportunity in what we do. Are you seeing this question from Dan? This is a good one. Are the results of a 360 or a one-to-one coaching session ever used by the coachee's boss to decide that perhaps they need to exit the organization? Quote, yikes, this isn't fixable. Or are there confidentiality ethical guidelines there which preclude that? So can I touch on this first, and then I want to hear you?
Please do.
There is confidentiality in the coach and coachee engagement. So it is not a one size fits all thing where the 360s just go. They don't go directly to the boss. They do not. They are held in confidence. And if the manager is a stakeholder, which usually they are, the boss is a stakeholder, and the coachee does their check-ins, their monthly check-ins on how are they doing, the manager can come to the coach and say, I don't think that this is going very well, or whatever it is. But you can't just open up the file on the 360s. Do you agree, Dan?
I do. And this can get tricky. If you're an internal coach, it's a little trickier than being an external coach, because I've done workshops for companies where I was full-time employee and just in a coaching role. And you had vice presidents, senior vice presidents that felt that they were entitled to that information. So I was their first and only really line of defense. I would say, look, if you want me in this role, you're not going to get this information from me. If you ask so-and-so if you can review it and they say yes, that's between you guys.
Exactly.
But you're not going to get this from me.
This isn't going to be your performance plan, your PIP.
Yeah.
This isn't going to be no.
I am not going to betray their trust so you can try to do X, Y, Z. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just going to be no thing.
It's just what it is. Otherwise, you have you compromise the whole coachee relationship.
The whole relationship, the confidentiality. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. Nobody's going to want to be coached by you.
Right.
And then if you're an external coach, you have a great deal more power in this situation because you can set the record straight from the start and just say, if you want to work on, let's say you're talking to a CEO who wants their entire executive team to go through a 360, and you pick out the tool and everything's cool, and you got everyone's name and you're conducting everything. And they say, okay, Nancy, I want you to send me all these 360s of people. Before that even happens in your contract, you just say, this is how confidentiality works.
Correct.
I will send them their reports. I will debrief them on their results. This will be completely confidential. If you want to know about that information, you speak directly to them about it. They will decide what they will and will not tell you. Mm-hmm. And this is where you get some conflict sometimes because they're like, well, I paid for it. Like, well, actually, you're paid for the development of an employee.
Exactly. You didn't pay for an information flow.
You did not pay for CIA intelligence about who they are as a person.
I know. Dan, we have 2 minutes, and I just want to make sure because we could talk about this for another hour.
Oh, yeah.
2, 3. And I'm sure we will, you and I. But before we close, I want to make sure everyone knows how to find you. If they want to work with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So my website and my email are very, very similar. You can email me at daniel.osborne@MaxPotentialCoachingUS.com, or you can visit my website at MaxPotentialCoachingUS.com. Everything's up and running. I offer a handful of different services, whether it's one-on-one coaching, stakeholder-centered coaching, assessments and workshops, and also
assessments. So many assessments.
Oh yeah,
Dan is just so many assessments.
I collect them. I love them. I will never stop. I admit it.
It's good stuff, Dan. This has been a fabulous conversation, and I hope we'll do it again. There's so many facets to this. We touched on a few of them, but I know this is going to be really valuable for my audience. So thank you for joining and sharing your insights. And thank you, everyone who is watching Ask Nancy. Feel free to get in touch with me at explore@nancyrberger.com. If you have any questions or want to learn more about my work or Dan's work, I can get you connected with him. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good afternoon, and we'll see you in a month.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you, Nancy.